Have you heard claims about efficient language learning through using frequency word lists? Claims that 500 or 600 words make up something like 80% of any text? There is of course some truth to these statements because in a given text, some words would occur hundreds of times while others only a few times or never. But I also think that it's important to evaluate these statements from the point of view of the content of the text you're reading, to see not how many words you understand, but how much of the content you can actually grasp, how much of the information contained in a given passage gets through to you. So if this is something you're interested in, keep watching. And please consider hitting the subscribe and like buttons to help the channel and to be notified when new content comes online. It goes without saying that knowledge of vocabulary goes a long way in our ability to speak a language. Words are among the most basic components of a language, and so if you're learning another language, you cannot avoid having to learn the words. Those who approach language learning from the point of view of vocabulary sometimes draw attention to the frequency of words in a language, because some words are inevitably used much more than others. And so if you look at the frequency of words, say in a book, you will notice that some of the words occur hundreds of times. So it makes perfect sense to focus your attention on the words that are common, because they seem to offer the biggest benefit. They make vocabulary acquisition much more efficient, so you are in general much more productive. Or so it seems, because I think there's actually another side to this line of reasoning. Namely, that you also need the other words, even if they occur only a few times. And this is because the most common words are typically function words, such as prepositions, articles, pronouns, and grammatical particles. These are words that form sentences out of all the other words, and also link the sentences into longer segments, such as paragraphs. So they are like the mortar or cement that holds the bricks together, and they're absolutely necessary because you cannot build a house without holding the bricks together. But my argument is that you also need the bricks. Of course, in a word frequency list, function words amount to about a few dozen words at the beginning of that list. So the first 500-600 words would still contain a number of other words, such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, that is, the bricks. And quite usefully, it would be the most common of them that would be included in such a list of 500 or 600 words. And without doubt, it is absolutely important to learn these 500-600 common words, because they're used so often. You will meet them over and over again as you keep reading or listening. But I would like to add that it's also extremely important to learn the less commonly used words, because these frequency lists are typically generated from a variety of content, including books and essays and articles. And a proper frequency list will do a great job in listing the words that are shared in these books and essays and articles, but at the same time omitting those that are not shared. And this is where the problem arises, because the words that are not shared typically form the subject matter of particular books and articles. So if a book is about weaving techniques or the history of silos, your shared frequency list will typically omit words related to these topics, because they do not occur in the other books or articles. And if you use the word list to read one of those books that were used to generate your frequency list, you will understand most of the things in the book, but not the actual subject matter of the book. So you will kind of understand the sentences of the book, but not the content, not the main point. If a book or article is on a concrete subject, then that subject is probably too specific to have the relevant vocabulary included in a shared but generic word list. And so you would miss the most important part. I can illustrate this with a personal experience. A few years ago, in our classical Chinese exam, students had to read a story about a donkey which was brought to an island where there hadn't been any donkeys before. And on this island there was also a tiger which hadn't seen a donkey before. So it didn't know what to do with it. It saw that it was a big animal and so potentially dangerous. So instead of attacking it, the tiger was kind of always bouncing around the donkey, provoking it, until one day the donkey kicked the tiger. And that was the point when the tiger went, "Oh, that's it? That's all you've got?" And so he jumped on the donkey and killed it. Now, as it happens, most of the students did not know the Chinese character for the word donkey, which is actually quite complicated when written with the non-simplified character. The students could use a paper dictionary, but most of them did not look up the word, probably because they were pressed for time. So most of them guessed the word. And some translated it as deer, some as elephant, and someone even as the troops. Since the story was about the donkey, who entered the scene in the very first sentence, how you interpreted that particular character actually made a big difference in how your story progressed. So those students who did not realize that this was even an animal actually went on in a very different direction. The point is that the word donkey was a single word in this passage, and it's not a very common one in classical Chinese texts, which typically talk about more elevated topics. Yet this particular word was crucial for understanding the entire passage. So coming back to the problem of attacking language learning using word frequency lists, I think that by relying too much on them, we run the risk of missing the donkey in the story. We kind of understand what each sentence is about, but we miss the whole point. And to turn to my own point here, I think that word lists are incredibly useful. But it's also extremely valuable to recognize that vocabulary is only part of the language. We also need to see these words in context and work with units of language that are larger than words. Memorize whole sentences and read entire paragraphs. Because ultimately you want to understand the message or the point in a book or a movie, rather than the individual words in sentences. You want to keep your eyes not on the individual units of language, but on the point that is being communicated to you, what the writer or speaker wants you to understand. So I think word lists are most useful when they are only part of your language learning strategy, when you also consciously try to understand how they're strung together. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about the topic of using word frequency lists when learning languages. Let me know what your experience with using them has been. Thank you for watching and see you next time.